marks the abrupt end to your journey.
So, can anyone tell me why that voice clip sounds so darn familiar?
They've engaged their weapon systems. They've launched a projectile.
Today on Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look at an easily forgotten yet intriguing space simulation title called Nomad. And it's kind of an odd game to comment on because in many ways it's simpler than other space simulation titles which came before it, yet it also has tons of depth as well. And it's almost like a merging of the best parts of the Star Control and Starflight games into one program, yet it stands apart in its own unique way, especially by being 3D rendered instead of using 2D sprites. Now, originally, this game was going to tie in with Disney's Space Mountain attraction at their theme parks, but this idea was scrapped at some point. And despite this, development continued, and ultimately we got this game that you're looking at now. In fact, remnants of this game's Disney-linked past still exist in this thing, such as a reference to Space Mountain in the player's logbook, and the somewhat out-of-place cartoony character designs for the various races that you come across. I'm also told that the ship you board on the actual Space Mountain ride is the same visual design as the ship in this game, though I've never been to a Disney theme park, so I couldn't say that firsthand. Despite being a very approachable game that's easy to play, it's very unbalanced, and making progress is somewhat difficult thanks to the lack of numerical information, such as how powerful the different missiles are or the relative values of different commodities you acquire. There's also quite a bit of trial and error involved, so you're probably going to want to routinely save your game just in case you get destroyed and have to reload your last save. Unless you want to play it the hardcore way, which I'll get into a little later. Nomad was developed by two companies, Intense Interactive and the Papyrus Design Group, and was originally published through GameTek in 1993, though in 1994 they put out an enhanced CD-ROM release with some additional features, mostly in terms of animation and sound. It primarily supports VGA 320x200 256 color graphics, and while I've heard the game has EGA support, I found no way to prove that it actually does. No box shots showing EGA support, no mention of EGA support on the box itself, no ability to run the game in DOSBox with an EGA installed, and I can't even find EGA screenshots of the game online. In terms of audio support, it only supports the Disney Sound Source and Sound Blaster cards. Now I tried both settings out under DOSBox, and oddly enough, the Disney Sound Source support seems to be slightly better, possibly owing to the game's Disney-related roots. So if you're not running on actual hardware, that's the audio device I would recommend using. As for its current release date, it's still commercial and is a fairly uncommon game to find in the wild, though I wouldn't call it out and out rare. Plus there's no demand for it, so regardless of which version you come across, be it the original floppy disk release or the CD-ROM version, and regardless of if the box and manuals come with it or not, you can expect to pay around $15 to $20 for a copy. Actually, speaking of both the floppy disk and CD-ROM versions, telling the two apart can be a bit of a challenge. Unfortunately, the best way to figure it out is to just ask the person selling it. If the box is sealed, have them check the spine. My copy is the CD-ROM version and has a little red note on the front saying as such, but I don't believe this is present on every CD-ROM version out there, so be mindful if you're looking for a specific copy. Also, just as an aside, I find it amusing how some store somewhere in 2011 was selling this particular copy of mine for just $1.50. Now, the story for this game is somewhat unusual. Basically, at some point in the future, an alien ship of unknown origin and purpose crash lands on Earth with no one on board and its navigational databanks completely erased. The OESI, the Organization of Earth Special Intelligences, does its best to cover up this incident, but later discovers that something had come and repaired all the damage. Now, given that this ship only has room for one occupant and seems specially designed to interact with unknown alien races, the OESI decides to take a calculated risk and send someone up into space in the ship to discover why it crashed and what else might be out there. However, once you leave Earth, you're on your own with your own destiny to chart, thus leading into the title of the game. And one other point of interest about this game's lore is the manual it comes with inside the box. And it's contained inside a slipcover and is printed on a very unusual and thick kind of black paper with silver ink. And wait a minute, what's it say on the bottom here? Unauthorized personnel reading this document will be prosecuted by the full force of the law as per the United Nations Security Act 465 whatever. The minimum penalty for conviction is 10 years imprisonment. Oh geez, maybe I shouldn't show you guys this thing. Yeah, let's do it. So inside the manual we have I'm sorry, I just had to do that. But yeah, the manual's written in universe, and it's meant to be a primer on how the alien spaceship actually works. And it's only a few pages long and doesn't go into any extensive detail, but really, all you need to know about playing the game is in here, since it's really not that complicated. This game works on a very different paradigm than what you might be used to with space simulation games. And when I said it was like a cross between Star Control and Starflight, I really meant that. A large portion of the game comes down to simple exploration, trading, mining resources, engaging in combat, and completing missions. Though that said, the one thing you'll probably be doing a ton of is communicating. One of the things the manual tells you about is that your ship's onboard computer is instantly able to recognize and translate any language that you come across. And one of the big things you need to do to survive is trade. So naturally, you're going to be spending a lot of time getting used to the communication system. Before we talk about that though, let's just give a quick primer on the interface. You have menu options you can click on, or you can use the arrow keys, or you can just use shortcut keys. Now, having several ways to utilize the same parts of an interface is nice, but it did lead to a few hiccups, such as things you need to double-click to select, or situations where you can't just use shortcut keys because you have text boxes to worry about. So just keep in mind that you may have to use one control method over another, or may have to double-click something sometimes, and yeah, you should be fine if you just keep all that in mind. Okay, so communications. There's roughly a dozen alien races you'll encounter in this game, and each one relates to each other one in various ways. And whenever you're engaged in communications with someone, you can tell how the communication is going by watching their facial expressions. The happier someone looks, the more likely they'll be helpful, and the more generous they'll be with their trades. And the key things you can do during communications is ask questions, present facts, show an object from your inventory, give an object from your inventory, or conduct trade. Asking questions is incredibly detailed. You're allowed to ask questions about any person, place, object, or race you've encountered in the game, including things you would consider to be incredibly trivial. The moment a particular thing is ever mentioned or seen, you gain the ability to ask about it. And taking advantage of this is the best way to encounter new technologies, facts, or just learning more about what you can do. This is especially important given that all of the trading in this game is done by bartering certain objects for other objects. There is no money in this game, so you need to get used to the fact that everything you have in your cargo hold is something you may want to sell for something else. Now, stating facts is actually the best way to adjust someone's disposition. Facts are basically snippets of information you'll occasionally learn about various races or things, and whether that fact affects the disposition of someone positively or negatively depends on how they view that information. Not to mention how positively or negatively it comes across, which should be the same for all members of that individual's race. The best way to improve dispositions overall, though, is by performing missions and earning rewards. To perform a mission, all you need to do is access the ComNet for a particular planet and see what missions have been posted. And if the mission is being given by the specific planet that you're at, you'll be given additional information letting you know that the mission is now underway. Once you've completed a mission, it'll either be removed from the ComNet immediately, or you'll need to access a ComNet and scroll to where the mission was to gain the rewards offered by it. It's kind of a clunky way of doing it, and not having a more streamlined interface for this sort of thing just makes it a bit awkward. But missions don't expire or anything, so you can always just go back to a ComNet to remind yourself what's available. I should point out, though, that early in the game, the contents of the ComNet seem to vary from planet to planet for some reason, though as you get further in, this seems to be less of a factor, ultimately to the point where the ComNet contents are identical at every planet. Most of the game is played simply by navigating context windows. From the main interface, you'll be able to navigate to other planets and star systems, scan nearby planets and ships, communicate with anything nearby, enter combat, access your engineering systems, access your inventory, access your log, or access your time lock system, which is effectively how you save the game and/or quit. The scanning is done primarily as a prelude to engaging in combat, or sending a labor bot down to a planet. In particular, when scanning a planet, you're told if the planet is inhabited or not, whether it was been previously inhabited, but now isn't for whatever reason. You're told the temperature, what kinds of ores there are, atmospheric gases, life forms, as well as the planet's suitability for agricultural processes. This all leads into the labor bot system, which doesn't really come into play until later, but we should probably just get it out of the way now. Labor bots are essentially automated vehicles you launch down to a planet to engage in various activities. Now, there's 6 different kinds of bots as far as I can tell: Arch, Farm, Gas, Ore, Ranch, and Spy, which are respectively used to retrieve things, perform farming, collect gases, mine ores, breed primitive life forms, or engage in espionage tactics, typically stealing things. The bots themselves, though, are fairly unprepared for hostile environments. So when you're getting ready to send one in, a special indicator will let you know how strong their environmental capabilities need to be to survive the particular planet you want to send them to. Once they're in place, Archbots and Spybots will immediately locate and collect what they need to, while the other bot types are designed to work over a stretch of time. Thus, you leave them be, and when you come back, they'll have a haul to bring back to your ship. And speaking of, you might be wondering how you'd remember where you left your bots, and this leads into the navigation system, which is done remarkably well. You can either manually select locations from a star map, or you can choose your location from a list which can be filtered in various ways, such as if the planet is inhabited or uninhabited, whether you've been there at least once before, whether the planet is in the same sector or not, whether you have any labor bots there or not, and you can also filter by the race which commands ownership of that area. And just like with the communications topics though, this navigational system only tracks the places you've heard about, even if just in passing. Anything your in-game character has yet to learn about simply doesn't show up, which means if you know about it and you want to go there, you've got to go to it using the star map. The combat in this game is incredibly basic, and this is actually where things get a bit tricky, because surviving combat often comes down to just having the best equipment and being fast on the draw. When combat begins, you can accelerate, decelerate, and turn with the arrow keys. All weapons in this game are missiles, so you must first acquire a target to lock onto, and once the target is locked, you fire a missile and hope it hits. And most of the time it should, unless you're too far away, too close, or don't have a proper lock onto the target. You can cycle between the various missiles you have access to, but combat goes by so quickly, you can end up destroyed if you take a moment to change your missiles around. Actually, I have to wonder if the misbalancing in the combat is due to a mistake in coding the game's item progression. I played for several hours straight, and the best shield system I could find didn't even fill up my shield quality gauge a quarter of the way. I actually spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out how to get an exceptional shield system, but just couldn't figure anything out. Eventually you get to a point where all of the missions to take on are about destroying 2 cruisers at a time, and this simply is not possible to do if all you have is a weak shield system, because the moment you lock on to one cruiser, the other one is already 3 seconds from destroying you. The other thing with the combat is the lack of any energy weapons. Since all the weapons are missile-based, you need to keep a stock of missiles at all times, otherwise you're in big trouble. You have 2 ways you can exit combat, either by escaping into hyperspace or by simply disengaging and going back to your main interface. Escaping into hyperspace will send you back to friendly territory so you can perform repairs and everything. The other thing to keep in mind about combat too is that you have a jamming system at your disposal, and 100% of the time you want to activate it the instant you start combat. Otherwise, you may end up facing more enemies than were originally intended. And when combat is over, you also want to lower your shields. Otherwise, the next time combat begins, your shield strength won't be as high as it should be. Speaking of making repairs, that's one thing I find odd about this game, is that they included this whole system for being able to take damage to various ship systems and having to resort to sending maydays to nearby ships. But outside of combat, you can perform full repairs pretty quickly, even without special equipment to make the repairs go even faster. So the whole mayday system is actually kind of pointless when it comes down to it. The engineering screen is also where you'll be able to equip various ship components from, though some components are always active so long as they're in your inventory, such as the one that makes your repairs go faster. Your ship actually has an incredibly large cargo hold, made even more curious given how small it physically is, almost as though the cargo hold stores things in some strange way that allows for near infinite storage. When I say near infinite, because I do think there's a limit given the red bar that never shows more than a single pixel on the right side, but I think it takes a massive amount of gameplay to actually get to that point. While your inventory will normally show you things you also have equipped, when you go to trade stuff, equipped items are excluded, so you can't accidentally sell something off if you're using it. The last things to quickly mention are your logbook and the time lock. The logbook is simply raw text that's written automatically, or you can also write your own notes into it. And quite a bit of text can actually be written down too, so there's a search feature in case you need to look stuff up again. I should note, though, that nothing you write in here is permanent, and eventually the log will get so big that prior entries will be automatically erased to make room for more. As for the time lock system, this acts as the game's method of saving, but the only options you get are to save and quit, save and continue, quit the game without saving, or just not do anything with the time lock. There is absolutely no way to reload your game while already playing, because the game is actively encouraging you to take a hardcore approach. You see, if your ship gets destroyed, you eject, get your ship rebuilt on Earth, and then continue playing. When this happens, the further you were from friendly territory, the more stuff you'll be missing. Now, if you weren't that far at all, you'll only be missing a few things, but if you were right in the heart of enemy territory, you could be missing your entire inventory. Though every time you start a new life, you get 5 pieces of chocolate to help get yourself going again. But it'll quite possibly be a long climb to get back up to where you were. Overall, I feel Nomad is an incredibly underrated game. I will admit, it can get repetitive and there's a lot of things that they could have done better, but for the most part it's really easy to get into and has a ton of depth to it for what is ultimately a very simple space exploration game. Now, given the fact that it's not an easy game to come by anymore, I'd pretty much only recommend it for people who enjoy space exploration games like the Star Control and Starflight series, but even if you're just mildly interested in such titles, you may still find something here to enjoy. In terms of DOSBox, you want to set cycles to max, and you also want to set the Disney sound source setting to true so that you can use that as your sound device. Not that the Sound Blaster support doesn't work, it's just, I don't know, it's hard to put my finger on, but it's almost like some of the frequencies don't come through perfectly on the Sound Blaster side of things. And it's close enough though, so even if you do leave it set to Sound Blaster support, you may not notice any differences anyways. Also, while it's possible to configure the CD version to run straight from a hard drive, the CD itself only contains about 9 megabytes worth of data. So creating an ISO of it and image mounting it in DOSBox is still the simplest way to get it going. Anywho, that's all for this week's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next week's going to be super busy for me, so instead of doing any complex games with tons of features, I'm going to cover a trio of simple games from a producer who made tons of them. So the trick for episode 153 next week isn't to guess the games themselves, but to guess the producer. Now if you think you know who it might be, then send your guess to adg@pixelships.com and stay tuned as there's plenty more DOS games to come.